Iceland may not be everyone's first choice when it comes to taking a holiday, but it's not hard to see what makes it such a popular tourist destination. With its incredible scenery, geothermal lakes, and rich history, nearly 1.7 million people visited Iceland in 2022 alone. It is sometimes known as the land of ice and fire due to its volcanoes and icebergs, yet it also holds the title of the safest country in the world. Keep watching for more facts as we count down 7 things you should know about Iceland. Number 7. How Iceland got its name. There are 2 theories behind how this island got its name. The first, and probably most well-known story, is that Viking settlers wanted to stop others from settling on their newly colonized island. The title of Iceland, emphasis on ice, was a subterfuge to keep others away from this prime farmland, which produced many crops despite a cooler climate and short growing season. The other story is perhaps more logical, but it is far less legendary. This story involves a Viking called Hrafna-Flóki. This story goes that the Vikings discovered a new land around 865. A Norwegian named Hrafna-Flóki traveled there with his family, intending to settle. His name translates to Raven-Flóki because he took 3 ravens with him on his trip. You might think that this has to do with Norse mythology, and they took the ravens as a tribute to Odin. But the inclusion of these birds had a decidedly more practical function. Hrafna-Flóki would send the ravens into the air. If the birds spied land, they would fly towards it. If not, they would return to the ship. Hrafna-Flóki arrived in Iceland in the 9th century and started to farm and raise his livestock. They survived there for 2 winters. However, due to the harsh climate, the animals they had brought died, and Hrafna-Flóki decided to return to Norway with his family. As they were leaving, they observed that the Vágfjörður fjord was full of ice, so when referring to the island, he used the name Iceland, and the name just stuck. Hrafna-Flóki later returned to Iceland and settled there permanently. Number 6. Iceland was the birthplace of Leif Eriksen. Leif Eriksen has to be one of the most famous Vikings in history. The son of the infamous Eric the Red, who discovered Greenland, Leif and his family gained notoriety for their exploratory nature. Leif had 2 brothers and a sister and was born in Iceland around 970 CE. Leif is famous for being the first foreigner to set foot in America, nearly 500 years before Columbus landed in the Caribbean. There is some debate about how Leif found North America, with some sources saying he was blown off course when returning to Greenland from Norway. However, the Greenlandiga saga details how Leif had purposely traveled to America after learning of a new land from fellow Icelander Bjarni Herjolfsson. Bjarni had been driven to North America by storms 15 years prior to Leif's voyage. Historians believe Leif sailed past the northern tip of Labrador, which Leif named Helluland, land of flat rocks. He then continued to sail past central Labrador, which he called Markland, or land of forests, and landed a bit farther south, where he found an area rich with forests and grapes. Leif named this area Vinland, and a possible landing site has been identified as the area surrounding the Gulf of St. Lawrence. All of Leif's siblings also made it to America, except Thorstein, who was forced to turn back due to bad weather. Number 5. Iceland banned beer. In 1908, Iceland held a referendum on prohibition. The banning of alcohol was seen as progressive due to its negative impact on health, but it was also a political choice. Drinking alcohol, especially beer, was linked to the Danish lifestyle. As Iceland struggled to gain independence from Denmark, the decision to vote for prohibition was associated with their bid for autonomy. The banning of alcohol was passed with a 60% majority, and although women did not have the vote, they were vocal in their support of the ban. However, it wasn't long before Icelanders started home brewing and smuggling alcohol. Artists suddenly found that spirits were the best thing to clean paintbrushes. Ambassadors felt that alcohol would help with diplomatic relations, and doctors started prescribing alcohol in large quantities for various ailments. However, even the most lenient medical practitioners drew the line at beer. Some argued that beer would be a good treatment for the malnourished, but doctors were adamant that beer did not qualify as medicine. Prohibition partially ended in 1921 when Spain threatened to stop importing salted cod, which was highly profitable in Iceland, if Iceland did not reciprocate by buying Spanish wine. With wine back on the menu, it wasn't long before Icelanders started to rethink the whole prohibition thing, and in 1933 they voted to reinstate legal alcohol consumption, but not completely. The cheapest way of consuming alcohol was high-strength beer, and Icelandic powers feared that legalizing it would lead to a sharp rise in alcohol abuse. Beer's association with Denmark also tarnished its reputation, and beer containing more than 2.25% alcohol was still banned. The link between beer and Denmark waned after Iceland gained independence in 1944. And the 1970s saw Icelanders travel beyond their borders and were exposed to other countries that enjoyed a good beer. The Icelandic government did allow pilots, cabin crew, and foreign tourists to bring in duty-free beer. And in 1979, Icelandic businessman David Sheving Thomas challenged this discriminatory rule by refusing to pay the fine on 6 bottles of beer he brought into the country. Throughout the 1980s, Icelanders made sure to buy duty-free beer every time they traveled, even if they didn't like it themselves. And by 1988, huge public support caused the issue to be debated by politicians. On March 1, 1989, beer was legally served in Iceland for the first time in 74 years. Scenes of Icelanders enjoying beer were broadcast live on television, and today, Icelanders still celebrate Björdagur, or Beer Day. Number 4. Iceland has 30 active volcanoes. Iceland may be more associated with a cold climate, but it has over 30 volcanic systems, each with its own central volcano. If we include dormant and extinct volcanoes, the number is closer to 130. Iceland is positioned on the boundary of 2 tectonic plates and a geological hotspot, meaning the volcanic eruptions are pretty frequent. Perhaps if Hrafna-Flóki had visited at a different time, Iceland would now be known as Lava Land. Evidence shows that in 934 there was a huge volcanic eruption in Iceland when the Elcha erupted. There is not much data on how the Vikings felt about volcanoes, but a poem from this time may relate to this volcanic activity. In the poem, a giant awakens, causing the land to shake. Next, the fire people of Sut, a fire giant, are said to be following the road to hell, which could relate to lava flows. One of Iceland's biggest eruptions happened in the late 1700s. On June 8, 1783, Mount Loki began to erupt. The eruption continued until February of the following year and is considered Earth's greatest historical lava eruption. The resulting haze of volcanic gases was seen as far as Syria, western Siberia, and North Africa. In Iceland, the gases affected crops and killed livestock. The resulting famine killed more than 1/5 of the Icelandic population. While Iceland's volcanoes are undoubtedly dangerous, they are also intrinsic to Icelandic culture and history. They have shaped the landscape and brought forth the famous hot springs. The volcanoes also attract large quantities of tourists, with the glacier-capped volcano Eyjafjallajökull on the south shore of Iceland being among the most famous volcanoes in the world. Number 3. Iceland has the world's oldest parliament. The Althing, still the national parliament of Iceland today, was founded in 930 CE at King Valir in southwest Iceland. At over 1,000 years old, the Althing is the oldest practicing parliament in the world. Norse families had been settling in Iceland since 874 CE, and in 930, 32 clans inhabited the island. These clans assembled, deciding to discuss issues annually rather than fight between themselves. Of course, as fighting was a staple of Viking life, it still featured in these yearly meetings. But generally, disputes were settled without bloodshed. Icelanders also used these gatherings to keep up to date with news from other areas on the island, as well as instate new laws. For a brief period in the early 1800s, the Althing was dissolved by the ruling Danes. However, it was reinstated after just 43 years and has been in continuous use ever since. Number 2. The Vikings were not the first people to live in Iceland. While Iceland shows no evidence of prehistoric human habitation, historians believe it was known to the ancient world. The first apparent reference comes from the 4th century Greek explorer Pytheas of Massalia, when he describes a country that lay 6 days sailing distance from the north of Britain. He called the island Thule. The island of Thule is also the name given to Iceland by its first known inhabitants, 8th century Irish monks. While it is not confirmed that Pytheas and the monks were talking about the same island, the name and the location had led many to conclude that Pytheas was indeed describing Iceland. These Irish monks were hermits, seeking out the island's solitude, but did not lay down permanent settlements. According to tradition, when the Nordic settlers began to arrive, they did find these Irish monks still living on the island. However, the new arrivals were not a welcome sight for the hermit monks, and they soon left the island. Number 1. Iceland may be home to elves. Iceland has a rich folklore that is still prevalent today. This mythology includes tales of elves. European elves often refer to small fairy-like creatures, but in Iceland, these elves are much more akin to the race described by Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings. In fact, when creating his elven characters, Tolkien was inspired by Icelandic tales. In Iceland, elves are called the hidden people, or huldufólk. They are taller, thinner, and more beautiful than humans. They look and act very much like us, but live longer. They like to party, especially at Christmas, when many people report seeing their brightly lit habitats. Their homes lie in the rocks, hills, and lava fields, with the fjord of Björgafjörður estuary said to house hundreds of these otherworldly creatures. Modern Icelanders have a complicated relationship with the myths of elves, and while most say they don't actually believe in elves, they also won't deny their existence either. Most Icelanders don't think of elves as actual physical beings, but they do respect the myths and traditions associated with them. This respect includes considering elf rocks and spiritual places when creating new infrastructure. New roads and construction projects have been rerouted or delayed out of respect for these traditionally magical places. Still, even though Icelanders are pragmatic about their beliefs, many will tread carefully when traveling through elf territory, just in case. If you want to learn more about these elves, there is an elf school in Reykjavik where you can learn everything you need to know about elves and other Icelandic legends, such as gnomes, trolls, dwarfs, and mountain spirits. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Iceland, check out our book, History of Iceland, a captivating guide to the history of the land of ice and fire from the Viking Age to the present. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.